How did you get that scar? I've a round scar in my belly. It's from when I was born. Another one between my index and middle finger, for trying to make lemonade. The rest because I like it rough. Had a piece of wood an inch in my leg, 4 stitches, the 3 in my stomach are for my appendix, my left elbow is 13 stitches and a scab, I picked it a lot. I feel the scab one man, but you always gotta pick at a scab, isn't that what fear for? Of course, not any stop you from bleeding out reasons at all. Oh heavens no, purely for entertainment. Ah yes, and sometimes to get out of class depending on the size and age. Cut myself on a lawnmower while trying to remove a rock. Whole tip of my finger would have been chopped off if my fingernail hadn't stopped it from cutting any further. My dad had a pet teacher who did this, but chopped off most of their finger. Twice. With different fingers. Without turning it off. Shoved my left hand through a small window in a swing door prior to safety glass. 28 stitches and a scar on the palm and on my forearm where it cut me to the bone. I jumped off a couch and my teeth went right through my bottom lip, and when we got to the doctors we had to wait 3 hours to be told if they open it up again it would hurt more. That's because it was already closed because of dry blood. My mom said I cried a lot. I was born via C-section. The doctor slipped and gashed my arm with the scalpel. My scar grew with me through my life. The first thing to ever happen to me in this world was a strange man in a mask jumping out of the darkness to cut me with his knife. Things just went downhill from there. Was there any sort of lawsuit that followed? People sometimes tease me about a hickey on my neck. It's actually a scar from where my port was, for chemo. It's kind of a conversation killer, so I just say it's a scar, and not from what. I dated a girl who was abusive. I laughed at something, and it made her angry, so she grabbed my arm and cut me across the wrist. I needed 12 stitches on the outside, plus 2 to the artery she hit. Plus now it looks like I cut my own wrist forever. I have several burn scars on my hands, some dating back 15 years plus. I got them all by carelessly rearranging meat and stuff in the oven while it's cooking, and then accidentally touching the red hot heater element. By now, it doesn't feel like Christmas until you can smell burning human flesh. I often wish there was a more badass story behind them. Not too bad of a scar, but a little funny story. I have a scar on my thumb that's rather small now, got in when my grandpa taught me how to use a knife when I was 6. He said to always cut away from yourself, and doing so worked well, but the second he looked away I had sunk the knife into my thumb, from you guessed it, cutting towards me. Happy I have it though, it reminds me of him every time I see it. I have a 1-inch scar on my left forearm. Being the edgy teenager I was, I decided to hang weapons on my wall. There were some kind of curved blades with wooden handles. The first one went up with no problem, but the second one didn't sit on the pegs right, and fell end over end towards me. I got superficial cuts on my hand and wrist, but the very tip of the blade hit my forearm, before clattering to the floor. Needless to say, I got very lucky in that situation. I'm a janitor. When I was taking a break from cleaning carpet at a bank, a guy with a gun came up from behind and forced me into the bank. After 10 minutes of the gun at the back of my head and realizing I don't have access to the money, he decided he wanted me to drive him to my ATM and withdraw money for him. I jumped out of the van before going anywhere to run across the street to a bar. He smacked me with the gun across the back of my head and left in my van 14 staples later, and I've got a lifelong reminder. It was my birthday, and for one of my presents I got a whittling knife. BTW, my step granddad is a carpenter who likes to carve ducks, because they're the easiest to carve anyway. I was whittling by the fire, and cut myself, and it was bleeding. Like crazy I rushed to the bathroom sink. It turns out that I cut myself in 2 places, the bigger one on my index finger, the smaller one was on the finger next to it. Now I have a small line across my finger. I have 6 scars on my right leg, all resulting from a broken leg, a large scar on the left side of my ankle from the actual compound fracture, 2 pinhole scars on each side of my heel and 2 on my shin from the external fixator that they had on me, and a large surgical scar on the upper right portion of the front of my leg near the ankle that's approximately 4 inches long. Fun times. I broke my finger when I was playing volleyball in school. It had to be operated, and pins were put in. These were some painful months, but everything healed back together. I was running and I tripped. I had a scab and I picked it off, and the scar literally looks exactly like the Vineyard Vines whale on my left hand. It's been there for 10 months. When I was a junior in high school, I was playing in a baseball game for my high school team, and on my first at bat, the pitcher hit me in the head. The skin in my forehead split apart, and I started bleeding like crazy. Had to get 5 stitches, but surprisingly no concussion. Ended up with a badass scar about an inch long that goes from my forehead to my eyebrow. I decided to fly a kite, like every other 9-year-old. There wasn't that much wind, so I tried for a running start. It worked. I showed my friend, and he wanted to try. We used our neighbor's driveway, which had a bush next to it. Pay attention to the bush, kids. Anyway, friend goes for a running start, and he goes very fast. I was standing next to the bush, but, bam, string gets attached to a stick in the bush. It literally scraped skin off the inside of my leg. I end up crying on a chair with Neosporin on my leg. I have a scar that goes up and over my head like a pair of headphones, about a ½ inch away from the top of each ear. I was in a car wreck and they needed to flush out a subdural hematoma from around my prefrontal lobe. The wreck also rearranged my face, so they needed to reconstruct my orbital bone. The scar from that is tucked into my eyebrow, but I have a good bit less eyebrow there. I also have a Harry Potter scar on my forehead, and, on my chest, a long scar from a few inches below my sternum straight down, and around my belly button. They had to take out my lacerated spleen. I'm sure these scars would have been more subtle if they hadn't had to work in such a hurry. In first grade I was running one direction and a big 5th grader ran into me, and his incisor got lodged into my skull. The doctors pulled it out, and I kept it in a small jar. We wanted the tooth back and I refused. My attitude was kick a ball over the yard. It's their ball. The principal convinced me to give it back. Turns out, when my mom told me that constantly scratching at mosquito bites would leave scars, she wasn't lying. I did a backflip, landed on my unstable feet, and did another one, flew through the trampoline netting, and landed on a sharp wooden stair. An epileptic ex-Westminster show dog had a fit and bit me, leaving a puncture wound on my thigh when I was like 12. My sister dropped boiling marshmallow on my hands, and the sugar made it stick to my hand and keep burning me. Fun times. My BMX bike brakes failed long time ago. I jumped off the bike while going downhill fast to avoid crashing into a car. Was running down the hallway and then slid on a Hoover wire and slid into the edge of a door, resulting in a line in the middle of my head. In preschool I was using the stall and a girl scared me and I fell and hit my face against the toilet. Made me bleed a lot, but I isn't that big. Small scar on my cupid's bow from when I was younger and decided to pull a hairdryer down from a shelf by the cord. Blood everywhere. Some are from the fryer at my first job and a few are from when my friend shot me with a 20 gauge on accident. He was kinda far but it still left a couple good marks. 4-year-old sister decided 2-year-old me deserved to die. RIP eyebrow. Wires on bras sometimes break and then you can get cut and stabbed by them, which I did. Garden fork, big toe, 8-year-old B. Let's say there was a lot of noise. Got hit with someone else's boom while sailing right next to my eye, 12 stitches, and no more sailing for me. A biopsy of my bicep to confirm that I indeed have a rare muscular disorder. A stick flew up into my bike chain, and it turned my bike into a human catapult as I'm going downhill. I have a scar on the top of my hand where surgeons had to bolt my second metacarpal back together. Was on my roommate's skateboard. Fell and my glasses smashed into my eyebrow. Self-harm. It's a more serious addiction than people give it. CR40BH. Bicycle accident in winter. Demolished my entire chin, and it had to be stitched. I have a bunch of scars on my heels. I got them from getting blood transfusions when I was still in utero. A mirror fell on my head when I was 8 years old. Trying to cut a tennis ball in half with a pocket knife and didn't lock the knife. My father was a drinker and a fiend. By being an eduteen all those years ago. Older brother hit me in the face with a shovel. I was 6, he was 8. Stuck my finger into one of those electric lighters for gas hobs. Cut that skin between my thumb and index finger open with a cat food can lid. Hit my head on the sharp corner of a door when I was like 3. Box cutter plus poor impulse control. I jumped on a bed and hit my eyebrow. That's why there is a bald spot there. Stepped on my George Foreman grill while getting out of bed. I climbed up a tree, slipped and got stabbed by a tree branch in 3rd grade. Slammed my hand into the side of an old meat freezer. I was accidentally burned by a cigarette. I don't know, and that's why it's interesting. My fingers were joined together when I was born. I tripped over a cedar stump and got a nice 4-inch shard lodged into my shin.